moving on, the next concept we're going to take a look at is validation. And so validation is the idea that as somebody enters something within our fields, we want to make sure that it's good or okay or not harmful. All of this is done so that we ensure people aren't trying to do something malicious to us, like that comic of dropping all of the tables within our database. Usability, right? We want the end user to know that they did something wrong right away. It's very annoying when you're filling out a form or an application, you hit the submit button and then it tells you something is wrong. Good user experience will let you know on the fly, right? Enter your date format like this if we did it wrong, right? So we know the proper format of how to display the day, the month, the year. And resource usage, right? We want validation to happen so that we are not processing a bad form behind the scenes, causing load times just to send an error back our way, right? It's kind of a waste of resources, a waste of processing power, waste of time. So security, usability, and keeping in mind our resources. So when we're going through validation, there are two different ways in which we can go about it. There's client side, so this happens on the UI, and there's also server side happening within our backend code. So when we're going through client side validation, we're going to be using a couple of tag libraries to help us out, either from Alloy UI, Liferay UI, or Clay. Server side validation is going to be done through a Liferay validator class. So let's take a look at how Alloy UI can help us out. Within the input field, using our Alloy UI tag library, we can have the validator tag say this field is required, and if someone tries to tab away or click it and then click something else without filling it out, it'll display the error message, please enter the title. Right. For more info about the validator, we do have the link there. There are many other tags that you can use, not just required. You can say this must be email format or phone number format, and so on. We can also create our own custom Alloy UI validator as well. So you can add some logic to determine what is deemed valid. So if the validator doesn't have the proper value that you're looking for, you can create your own rules or your own type of validation. Now, using Clay, we can also use validation as well. Behind the scenes, Clay is built on top of Bootstrap, so there is the Bootstrap validator made available to us. Right, using the Liferay utility, or the Liferay utility class, I should say, we can use the validator there as well, using different methods, ensuring that whatever it is that's entered is valid. So we can do things like checking if it's null, or again, if it's a string or a phone number, and that validator class has many more methods to help us out with our validation. So with validation in mind, one of the things that we may want to do is sanitize our fields as well. As we're sanitizing them, this is ensuring that no sort of malicious code is going to be executed in the backend. So someone might type something like, drop tables within a field. We don't want that to actually execute behind the scenes. So you may sanitize the input, right? So a couple different ways we can do this. You can use the HTML element to help us out. We also have an HTML utility, HTML util class to provide sanitization. And then you can also use our OWASP library to sanitize web content that's being created. So you can configure that over in the system settings of Liferay. Okay, so Again, when we want to provide an output and have it sanitized or escaped behind the scenes, we can do so as well. So using the cout, you can then escape the XML in this case so that it doesn't do anything malicious, doesn't execute. You can do the same thing using the HTML utility or HTML util class to escape the text as well. So a couple of best practices for validation. When we are implementing validation, we want it done both on the client side and the server side. So UI and behind the scenes in our backend code as well. If we only use UI, while it makes for a nice user experience, it still leaves our backend vulnerable to people very crafty, those crafty hackers in the darknet, right? We want to have control over all aspects of the input as well as the output. So with the input, we want to be able to sanitize and escape the characters as soon as possible. And with the output, we also want to escape and sanitize anything that may look malicious before it gets sent back to our user interface. So sanitize, escape, make sure you have validation on both sides, client side and server side. So next up is feedback, displaying some sort of meaningful message back over to the end user. So feedback is done using two classes, session errors for errors, session messages for messages. Or our errors are done with session errors, our success messages are done through session messages. So what does this look like? So I will start here over in the portlet class. So that's a good place to start. It is up at the top. So we start off looking for the validator. If the validator is not good, right, something happened with the validator, we're using the session errors class to display an error. What we're going to do is add to the request object a specific parameter or a specific key. In this case, the key is title empty. Now let's jump down to the JSP section next, and we see in the Liferay UI error, title empty. So we're adding the key title empty to the session errors. It gets picked up by the Liferay UI error tag. The keys match up, and then the message is going to be displayed. Please enter title. Now, if there was no language.properties or no language key defined, it would display exactly as is. Please enter title. But we do have the language.properties. So we provide the value of that message inside of language.properties. So it'll display, please enter the title. And then down at the bottom, we see the message displayed as so. So one more time, in our portlet class, we add a specific key to our request object. That key will get picked up in the view or in our JSP, and then we are able to display a message, right? In good design pattern here, we're going to provide a second key or a key message and provide the value over in language.properties. So just like what we've seen here. So Liferay by default will automatically display a default success message. It just says your request completed successfully. Now, even if we have our own custom success message, it's going to double up. So we add this property here to hide the default message that shows up when an action is completed successfully. If you want the doubling up, you can ignore this, but it just kind of looks funny. So let's talk about everything that we have discussed so far. So feedback and validation kind of go hand in hand. So we can start off with the validation portion. And validation, first, we're going to take a look and check to see, is this okay on the client side? So as the user fills out the fields, we can do our checks. From there, once they click the submit, we can then sanitize each one of the different fields so that nothing funny is going to happen behind the scenes. We'll do one more validation in the client side or in our backend code just to ensure that whatever it is that's been entered is truly correct. Now let's assume it is correct. We can then add a session message to display a success message back over on the UI side. If it's not successful, then you can do the same thing with the session errors, adding that specific key to display at the JSP side. And then as the output is coming out, we want to ensure that that too is escaped or sanitized along the way. So with all of that, let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like in a more formal way within our code. So what we're going to do is we're going to implement validation both on the client side and the server side. Right? So we'll take a look at what that looks like and implement, test, deploy, and get our validation and our feedback as well. So let's take a look.